Now, I'm going to be on Fox and Friends tomorrow morning, and it's tentatively scheduled for 4:50 a.m. They sometimes move the time around, 4:50 a.m. Pacific time. And I'm going to be discussing critical race theory. So I've been reading a lot about critical race theory. And it seems to be some sort of amorphous concept, essentially saying, as the 1619 Project says, that essentially America was conceived in racism, built on racism, and remains a racist institution, a racist country. That seems to me to be what it is. Now, the former President Barack Obama, before he became president, we've talked about this before, at a black church, was talking about how much America had to do in terms of race relations, which has increasingly become a term to simply mean how do black people feel about white people, and how do white people feel about how black people feel about white people. Because nobody seems to care about Asians or about Hispanics. It's all about black people and how black people feel. So when it comes to race relations, Senator Obama said at this black church, the Moses generation, referring to the generation of Martin Luther King, has gotten us 90% of the way there. We've talked about this before. My generation, referring to the Joshua generation, he said, has to get us that additional 10%. That was before he became president, let alone got reelected. 90% of the way there. Same man, fast forward a few years later, racism is part of America's DNA. Hold the phone. If the majority of white people in the 50s and the 60s in America said they would not vote for a black person, now fast forward, more say they would never vote for a woman, referring to Hillary in 2007, Gallup poll, 11%, versus 5% said they would not vote for a black person. More Americans said they would not vote for a Mormon, 24%, versus 5% who said in 2007 they would never vote for a black person. Far more said they would never vote for somebody who would be 72 years of age at the time of taking office, referring to John McCain. 42% said that. So wouldn't critical race theory suggest that far more Americans would never vote for a black person, that would never vote for a female or a Mormon or an elderly person? It's ridiculous. Obama got a higher percentage of the white vote than John Kerry did. I told you in 2008, 2012, there were 700 counties that voted for Obama both times. 200 of them switched in 2016 to Trump. Now, were they bitten by a racist radioactive spider in 2016? A spider that somehow avoided them 8 years earlier? And you got this huge apparatus designed to prevent this level of institutional racism. All these laws, EEOC, the Office of Federal Contract Compliance, every Fortune 500 company has some sort of diversity consultant or outreach person or somebody designed to make sure the workforce is diverse. Hollywood is left-wing. The media, left-wing. Academia, left-wing. Name an institution that's right-wing. And so if there is institutional racism, maybe people on the left need to look into the mirror. And there is not any evidence of systemic racism, let alone widespread systemic racism on the part of the police. Democrats are the first to tell you there's no evidence of widespread voter fraud, but they couldn't care less whether or not there is or isn't evidence, let alone widespread evidence of systemic police brutality when there isn't. And the same race-critical people never seem to ask, what can black people do to make things better? I'll tell you what my father would say. They should tip better. Oh, yeah, it's been studied. There is a Cornell Hotel School of Management study by a professor named Lynn who looked into tipping. And it turns out blacks are lousy tippers. My father used to always say that. Now, many people, their very first job will be waiting tables, meaning their impressions of people are going to be formed by their interactions. Black waiters will tell you the same thing. Nobody ever asks, what can black people do to improve race relations? And for years, Rasmussen has asked blacks, Hispanics, and whites, out of these three groups, which group is more likely to be racist? Whites say blacks are more likely to be racist than whites or Hispanics. Hispanics say blacks are more likely to be racist than whites or Hispanics. Blacks say blacks are more likely to be racist than whites or Hispanics. Anti-Semitism. For years, the Anti-Defamation League has commissioned polls to find out about anti-Semitism in America. And it's at an all-time low, around 11 or 12%. You can't get a whole lot better because around 8 to 10% believe Elvis is still alive or believe there's a chance he is alive. But it turns out that blacks are 2.5 to 3 times more likely to be anti-Semitic than non-black Gentiles. Does anybody ever talk about that? Armin Arbery, the black man who was jogging, is killed by a white man. What did LeBron say? We are afraid to leave our houses. Same guy, LeBron James, that surgically analyzes a basketball game, free throw shooting, field goal percentage, defense, offense, using numbers, using data, using stats, using analogies. But you ask him about black people being killed by whites. It keeps on happening. It doesn't keep on happening. Most homicide is same race. Half of the homicide victims in America, we talked about this before, are black. Almost all killed by other blacks. When you talk about interracial homicide, and it's rare, black-white, but last year there were roughly 750 black-white, white-black homicides. 500 whites were killed by blacks. 250 blacks were killed by whites. Blacks are just 13% of the population, yet kill twice as many whites as whites kill blacks at 61% of the population. This thing on? You want to talk about violent non-homicide felonies? I'm talking about rape, attempted murder, manslaughter, assault with a weapon, roughly 600,000 such acts any given recent year. 90% of the time, we're talking about a black perp, white victim, only 10% the other way around. No one's talking about that. But let's talk about a white cop who shoots a black person. Let's immediately assume that the motive was race, when studies show that the police are more hesitant to pull the trigger on a black person than on a white person. Can we knock it off? I've told you about a Time CNN poll, 1997, the black teens and white teens. 89% of black teens says racism was a minor problem or no problem in my own daily life. In fact, more black teens and white teens said failure to take advantage of available opportunities is a bigger problem than racism, end of quote. And we're talking about critical race theory. Orlando Patterson, a sociologist in the 90s, Harvard, said America, with all its problems, is the least racist majority white country in the world, provides more opportunities for blacks than any country in the entire world, including all of those of Africa. And we're still talking about critical race theory? Grow up. Let's talk about family destruction and bad schools and bad economic policies that are hurting and personal responsibility. Comply, you won't die. I'm Larry Elder.